It is about 7 o'clock, so we'll get started as soon as Dan sits down and takes a breath.
And Kathy gets off the elevator.
You want to wait for her, or do you want to start without her?
You go ahead.
Okay. All right. Before we get started, Jackson's going to lead us in a quick prayer before we jump into the material tonight.
Let's pray. Dear God, we are so thankful for this day that you've blessed us with and this time that you've given us to come together as fellow Christians and study your word. We ask you to be with us tonight, be with John as he teaches us, and help us to learn something and apply it to our lives. And we ask you to be with us the rest of this week, and we ask you to be with all the sick and all those who've lost loved ones, especially those in the plane crash. And we ask you to please forgive us of our sins. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Okay, tonight we're supposed to start Lesson 9, so Wednesday, Sunday, Lesson 9, but this past Sunday we did not quite finish Lesson 8, so I want to finish Lesson 8, do questions on that at the beginning of class, and then we'll transition into Lesson 9, and we're going to watch the video I told you all about, if I can get the technology working. It wouldn't get locked out YouTube on my laptop, so we'll try to cast and we'll see how that works. But that's probably the plan tonight. We'll see how that goes. So let's go back to chapter 2 of Esther, and we kind of left off here. This is the slide I had up on Sunday, that Esther becomes queen, right? So we've gone through the story around Ahasuerus or Xerxes, and he kind of got rid of his first queen because she didn't obey him, didn't do what he wanted, and he was the king, so you're going to obey the king's orders or there's going to be a problem. That's pretty much a pattern, I guess, back then, and with him in particular. So we went through the process of talking about how he went about finding a queen. You know, he had suggestions, brought a bunch of women in, lived in the king's household, if you will, and took them a year to get ready, and we learned about that. So here we are, kind of into the back half of chapter 2. And chapter 2, beginning in verse 19, we see that Mordecai discovers a plot. Who would read from chapter 2, 19 through the end of the chapter, verse 23 there? We'll talk about that and then get into our questions from chapter 8, or lesson 8.
Now when the virgins were gathered together the second time, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. Esther had not made known her kindred or her people, as Mordecai had commanded her, for Esther obeyed Mordecai just as when she was brought up by him. In those days, as Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthan and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold, became angry and sought to lay hands on King Ahasuerus. And this came to the knowledge of Mordecai, and he told it to Queen Esther. And Esther told the king in the name of Mordecai. When the affair was investigated and found to be so, the men were both hanged on the gallows, and it was recorded in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king.
All right, so we're not given a whole lot of information about Mordecai. We know he's a Jew and he's hanging out around, the palace area, and he seems to be getting into things, right? He's hearing things, he's seeing things. We'll see later how he, when Haman enters the scene, what he does and doesn't do with Haman. So he is like, I don't want to say he's in the king's inner circle, but he's somewhere around all the top leaders right there in the city. And, Mordecai overhears that there's a plot amongst the eunuchs to go kill the king. And so what we're going to talk about, the video we'll watch here in a little bit, might be one of the reasons why they want to kill the king. So we'll look at the timeline here in a few pages, but you'll remember that there was about 3 or 4 years from chapter 1 to chapter 2, and 3 or 4 years from chapter 2 to chapter 3. And in that time period before Esther got married, we believe that's when they went off to go attack the Greeks, and it didn't go too well for them. That's the video we'll see today. So I want to show that because I think it's good context and history to just understand why some of these things might be happening. So verse 20 says, Esther had not made known her kindred or her people, as Mordecai had commanded her. Is that the first time we heard that?
That was mentioned earlier in the chapter.
Yeah, it's not the first time. It's not the first time we hear that. You go back to verse 10. Esther had not made known her people or kindred. And this is before she was married. So before she was married, she didn't make known she was a Jew. After she was married, she had not made known she was a Jew. So at this point, it doesn't appear that the king knows this. That's an important point as part of our story that's going to keep building. Also, we've got these two guys, Bigthan and Teresh. They're threshold guards, which, as best as I can understand, you know what a threshold is. You kind of walk across the door to kind of get in someplace. They may have been the guards to the king's bedroom, or his part of the palace that he lived in, slept in, whatever. So they were ones that had access to the king. They could wait till he dozed off and go in and take care of him. It was a credible threat. It wasn't like, John's going to go kill so and so. Well, I never see the person. I'm never around them. So these people were credible threats. And Mordecai does something about it. He told the queen, and she told the king in the name of Mordecai. So she was attributing that to Mordecai, who is the Jew. Let's jump forward to chapter 6. And I'll read the first 2 verses there, because that's another story that's going to come back. And we'll get to this in the future, but some of these things build and connect. On that night, the king could not sleep, and he gave orders to bring the book of memorable deeds, the Chronicles, and they were read before the king. And it was found written how Mordecai had told about Bigthan and Teresh, 2 of the king's eunuchs who guarded the threshold, and who sought to lay hands on the king Ahasuerus. So we're going to see that we see that these guys were hanged here, but that's remembered later, and we're going to see how Mordecai ends up getting honored by the king for his acts. So just kind of file that away in your brain for when we get to chapter 6. That's where that comes from. All right, let's go into our questions. Got a handful of the questions I want to get through. Let's go to page 43. We'll do some of the questions on chapter 8. Since we've got these, we pay for the books, we're going to go through some of the questions and use them. I think the book on this one's pretty good. All right. Question number 2 on 43. By what name is Ahasuerus better known?
And the other guy. The other name.
Xerxes, and that long name with a bunch of consonants, right? Was Xerxes the Persian name or Greek name? Greek name. It's a short one, right? Ahasuerus was the transliteration of the big long Persian name. Who wrote the book Esther? Don't know? Okay. All right, what's the purpose of this book? How would you summarize the purpose of this book?
I put to show how God intervened to save the Jews, to help Esther get where she got.
Mm-hmm. That's one good reason.
Show his providence over his people, even in a foreign land.
Mm-hmm.
And he's over all people, not just his people too.
Yep.
Over all people. That's the reason it.
He has a hand in every person on earth, and all leaders. Whether you like them or not, he's got a hand in all leaders, right? Any other ideas or thoughts on?
You know, again, we mentioned where God's name wasn't mentioned, but his will, his way, it's still shown throughout. And I guess you could, see that today.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you may not always hear or see or say God's name, but God's still always there.
Yeah, I think you can even see that God is in control of the kings, and He is making a path for His people. And this again was between Ezra and Nehemiah. I mean, the timeline fits right in between there, and that's in the time that they're being restored to the land, and He's still providing for His people in captivity. And we see that Mordecai even had his heritage. He understood, his lineage and which tribe he was from. So I think it fits the pattern of the Old Testament. While it's more historical and does all the things we said, it fits the pattern. All right, number 5. Why did Ahasuerus assemble his nobles in Shushan?
It's a 6-month gathering, for possibly planning the Grecian War.
Yeah. Yep, he wanted to have a big party, and you can plan some things, it seems like, right? A little bit of a planning, a working lunch. That was a working lunch, I guess. All right, I'm going to maybe summarize 6 through 13 and kind of, what is your perspective on Ahasuerus' demand to his wife Vashti, her response, the response he had to her response, and all those, what's your take on all that?
He wanted to show off his stuff.
Mm-hmm.
She felt she was she had a little more arrogant attitude, just like him, so she's going to blow that off. And as far as his reaction, that was, he got opinions as far as what he should do and stuff like that. So he was mad, but there was anger right from him.
I think he was angry, and it required, I think, other people to come up with ideas on what to do.
Yeah, that was the thing. I mean, rather than just saying, go lop her head off or whatever, and then he actually asked for, what should we do? Or that's what's recorded. He asked, what should we do? So
yeah, I kind of question in that story, when you start seeing all these people start suggesting things to him, like, how bright is this guy? Like, could he not come up with his own ideas? Because he was just an angry guy. Like, he was just reacting.
if he was just a hothead, like as we kind of hear recorded, then I would think he would need help to do that. But who knows?
Anything else?
He was extremely arrogant. We know that, but I'm surprised that he gathered a group of guys together to say, "What should I do to my wife?" And then I'm surprised that he didn't consult with her before he made the final decision. Also, I think she showed dignity, truthfully, by not doing what he asked, even though she probably was required at that particular time and based on what was going on to do that. But she knew what was going on. He was drunk with wine and all these guys are having a great time, and she was gonna be paraded up there in front of, him and all the guys, and I think she showed dignity by saying, I'm not gonna do this.
Yeah, I think so too. He brought all his counselors in because he wanted to ask them, what does the law say about this?
Yeah.
He was looking for a legal answer, and he didn't really get one, I don't think. I think they had a suggestion, oh, you need to go write a law.
I was just gonna say, did anybody see Kanye West's wife at the Grammys?
No,
Did
I don't watch the
anybody
Grammys.
heard about it?
I don't watch the Grammys, or any of those
No, it was just on the news.
pat me on the back shows.
Basically, she wasn't wearing anything. I mean, more than I've ever seen ever. And I thought about this. I thought, he's trying to parade his wife, and she doesn't have enough dignity to say no. I saw people saying, blink twice if you need help. But I thought about this at the same time.
Probably neither one of them have too much upstairs, like this guy does. I mean, that's kind of.
It just was very similar to me in many ways.
That's good. I almost said observation, but I guess you observed something. And good observation.
It was on the news.
Yeah,
it wasn't like.
I don't watch the news either.
Yeah,
You're talking to somebody that doesn't watch the news because I live a happier life now. I don't watch the news. I quit all that stuff. All right. Question 14, one of my favorite ones. What preparation was made before a virgin was brought to the king?
12 months.
12 months. Took her 12 months. Well, it's because they probably didn't have soap back then, right? So.
It doesn't take 12 months to get that clean.
There's a process. It's 12 months.
Sounds like they soaked her in myrrh for 6 months, and they soaked her in spices and whatever else for 6 months. By the time she came out,
She's feeling great.
Yeah, I guess so.
It never says in here how old she is. But one thing I saw when I was looking this up is she was possibly between late 40s to late 70s.
Really? I think Xerxes was kind of about 35, if my memory is correct, when he came into power, and this was like 3 years later, so he was his late 30s probably when he became king. So.
Esther was that on?
And she
she raised, so that would have to mean Mordecai was even older.
Right.
Because he was raising her.
Well, they were both cousins, so it was probably pretty close.
I don't know, maybe not.
She had a son later on by the king. So
I've known people that have uncles younger than themselves, so, Yeah. All right, what special privileges did Haggai show Esther?
Gave her extra.
She kind of made an early impression, right?
John, do we know, I should have looked this up, but do we know, we don't think that the next king is her son, the son of Xerxes?
I don't think so. I haven't looked at.
I was thinking that's probably not her son.
I don't think so.
I've never heard that connection.
I believe history would say he has kids by multiple wives.
Yeah, I figured.
I haven't studied that. Yeah, that's a good question. All right, 16. How did Ahasuerus celebrate the appointment of a new queen? Another feast, feast after feast. 17. Why did Mordecai not wish Esther to divulge that she was a Jew? She could be killed, and that's something that comes up later. Even later, we'll see. In a couple chapters. All right. So, what does that tell you about the status of Jews in Persia? They're in captivity. What does that tell you?
Pretty low. I mean, it seems like from this point throughout the rest of history, in general, they are looked down upon.
I think they were just blending into the society because they seem to. Well, they're born to stay, so.
Right, I got more slides I was going to show you. I think they're part of the society, but also, I think they were discriminated against in some ways.
Were some of the, with the timetable, so had some of the Jews already gone back? They had, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, I mean, this is
So-
after Nehemiah, right?
So
In the
that's
middle.
why I'm thinking, you know, they knew the Jews were going back, and, you know, they probably were wanting them to get gone, or, you know, too. They weren't looking.
I mean, but only a small percentage went back, we talked about that,
Yeah.
right? So it's not like, I mean, like probably 90% of them or more were left, still in
Well, yeah,
captivity.
and like the author mentioned, they weren't doing badly
Yeah.
in Persia, because most of them didn't want to go back and risk having upheaval and you know, having to start from scratch again. They
Right.
wanted to stay in a relatively prosperous situation.
Right, and so we saw that they all had money too. You know, we studied that, you know, in Nehemiah. They had, I mean, some of them were really well to do, right? So here's our timeline again. I brought this back up because remember, this is marriage of Esther is somewhere 479-ish probably. It's a little after 480. And that's after Ezra and before Nehemiah. Again, with our timeline, I really like this chart that I found because it gives you the verse and actually tells you in what year of reign that section happened. And so we're here at the end of chapter 2, getting ready to go into chapter 3. And when you get into chapter 3, verse 7, and Haman casting his lots, we'll see that's the 12th year of his reign, which, you know, is 9 years after he holds his banquets. And it's another 5 years after Esther's married. Here's the same map I've shown you before. Here's the other one. This one I think is important before we watch the video, and I'm gonna have to jump to the video real fast or we're gonna run out of time. This is their empire, and so you're gonna see in this video how they're gonna go try to subdue Greece. They're gonna come up here. We already talked about how they had to go deal with some, you know, rebellions in Egypt. They were over Egypt, but it goes all the way over to India. Similar map right here at the bottom. The Persian Empire at its fullest extent is really, I mean, we're at the peak of the Persian Empire right here. So I could not get the video to play on my laptop, so I'm going to try to cast it from my iPad, and I hope this works. It works Sunday. All right, this is YouTube, so if something pops up, I apologize. It shouldn't, but it's giving me a check mark. There we go. This is about 20 minutes.
Coast, mainland Greece. On Matthew 7, in August 480 BC, a Greek army of only 7,000 men, led by King Leonidas and 300 Spartans, fought here against a 250,000-strong invasion force, led by Xerxes, the king of Persia. At stake, the future of Greek civilization.
Now, with new video game technology, you are about to see this great battle as never before. The vast numbers of soldiers, the troop formation, how they fought, how the battle was won. Get the view the generals wish they had. Now, decisive battle. Two and a half thousand years ago, Greece was not a unified nation. It was a collection of independent city-states, like Athens, Corinth, and Sparta, each with their own laws and systems of government. The Greeks lived under the shadow of the mighty Persian Empire, which stretched from present-day countries like Turkey, northern Egypt, Israel, Iran and Iraq, to Afghanistan and northern India. 2/3 of the known world. But even this was not enough for the Persian king Xerxes. He wanted to expand into Europe. Greece was the gateway. Xerxes was determined not to suffer the same fate. He gathered a huge army from all corners of his empire. 250,000 men set out for Greece.
Xerxes' expeditionary force to try to conquer mainland Greece was the mother of all expeditionary forces. Nothing like this had really been attempted before in the history of ancient warfare.
480 BC, Xerxes crossed the Hellespont and moved his army down through northern Greece, while the Persian fleet sailed along the coast. City after city fell.
Xerxes was a pretty fierce sort of guy. He wouldn't stop at anything to achieve his aims.
But Xerxes' goal was active. The Greeks had to stop him at all costs, and they had to do it here at Thermopylae. Otherwise, it would have clear run down.
Given the configuration of the Greek peninsula, that is where an army of any size has to come down. Thermopylae was the obvious place.
The Greek name Thermopylae means hot cake. The place was famous for its hot springs.
With high rugged mountains on both sides, the narrow pass was easily defensible, but it was also the gateway to Greece. But 2,000 years of sea and wind have eroded the battle site away. This is what it looked like in 480 BC. The Greeks sent an army of 7,000 men to hold the pass. They were joined by 300 soldiers from the city of Sparta. It is impossible to imagine a city more unlike Athens than Sparta.
The Spartan society was at the opposite pole from Athenian society. Athenians were very open. The society was wide open to anyone who wanted to come there. They would share everything with us, whereas the Spartans was a very closed society.
Spartans were educated to be soldiers, nothing else. From the age of 7, all Spartan boys trained for war. The army was their life. Even when married, the Spartan men had to live in barracks.
They couldn't take up any other trade. They couldn't deal in business or commerce. All ordinary work was done by slaves.
Sparta was a small town. It had no more than 9,000 peers, full Spartan citizens at any one time. So this army, everybody knew everybody else. If you were standing in formation, your brother might be over there, a couple of ranks behind. Your father might be over here. Your cousins would be over there.
They provided the leadership, they provided the spearhead, they provided the backbone. In every respect, their presence was what made Thermopylae what it was.
The 300 Spartans that marched to Thermopylae were led by Leander, the king of Sparta. He wasn't optimistic about his chances against Xerxes. For one thing, he had set out during a Spartan religious festival. This was thought to bring bad luck. Also, the Greeks had received bad news from the oracle here at Delphi. The priestess predicted that a Spartan king would have to die before victory was won.
Leonidas' wife, Gorgo, asked him what she should do if he didn't return from battle. To which he replied, "Marry a good man, have children."
He was apparently of absolute determined resolution and personally brave. He would have been in his 50s, not a young man, coming up towards retiring age, even in ancient Greek terms.
The Spartans wore a sculpted bronze breastplate and a helmet designed to terrify the enemy. Each man carried a shield shaped like a shallow wooden bowl. Painted on the face of the shield was the Greek letter lambda, the like a diamond, the Spartan homeland. The main weapon was a thrusting spear wielded overarm, 8 foot long with an ash shaft, a leaf-shaped iron head, and a bronze butt spike. In close combat, they drew the short sword, the zithos. By contrast, King Xerxes' Persian army was lightly armed. These men were trained for fast-moving warfare on open plains. Xerxes relied heavily on the Medes, who were deadly archers. The pride of place went to his elite band, 10,000 immortals.
The immortals were the cream of the Persian army. They were recruited as an elite. The term immortal was a Greek one, which they used because they believed that every time one of the 10,000 was killed, instantly in reserve, there was another guy waiting just to step into his place.
Leonidas stood with his Spartans at the narrowest point in the pass. 7,000 Greek troops deployed behind them. They defended a low wall. Xerxes drew up his army on the flat floor of the entrance to the pass.
Xerxes waited 4 days once they got into position there because he couldn't believe that these Greeks were going to actually stand and fight. He thought it was a joke.
On the 5th day, his patience ran out. He demanded, "Surrender your weapons." Leonidas shouted back, "Come and get them."
A lone scout rider got sent by the Persians up to where the Spartans were waiting before the battle. And some of the Spartans were out there doing their gymnastics. They were oiled up and they were combing their hair. And the rider just blew his mind. He said, what were these guys doing? How could they be so blasé? And of course, what they really were doing was psyching themselves up to fight to the death.
Xerxes had a throne set up on a nearby hill. From several hundred feet above, ordered his means into action. From their vantage point, the Greeks could only see a few thousand. This was merely the advance party, a force of 10,000 Medes, which wound round behind the mountain. Leonidas held back his Spartans and ordered the Greek troops forward. The Battle of Thermopylae had begun. It was not the walkthrough Xerxes imagined. August 480 BC, the Greek army led by King Leonidas and 300 Spartans, facing a Persian army of 250,000 men. The Persian king Xerxes watched in disbelief as 700 Greek troops formed up at the valley. They lined up in a phalanx formation. The phalanx, forest of spears.
The commander would signal for the push, the rear ranks pushing forward and pressing their shields against the backs of the men in front, and you pushed against the forces opposing you and literally tried to shove them backwards and drive them off the field. They trained their whole lives for this moment.
This phalanx was 18 men deep and 64 across. Their shields overlapped like the scales of a serpent's back, virtually impenetrable. The first three ranks lowered their spears and rolled forward towards the Medes. In contrast to the Greeks, the Medes were lightly armed. They carried light wickerwork shields and spears. Before they advanced, the Mede archers fired a volley into the phalanx. Leonidas and more Greeks reinforced the phalanx, pressing their way into the backs of their fellow troops. Volley after volley of arrows filled the sky.
The Greek infantry had a 3-foot shield. The shields were bronze-faced with maybe 2 inches of oak underneath that. So if you want to think of that as a kitchen cutting board. how hard you can whack a cutting board with a battle and you break it.
As the Greeks began to tire, Leonidas sent in his Spartan warriors. They advanced in a phalanx formation as the exhausted Greeks ran back.
As they would advance, they would be talking to each other, and inspiring each other, encouraging each other to advance, while these other people are advancing towards you. I mean, as each step got closer and closer, the terror must have been unbelievable.
The highly trained Spartans slaughtered all in front of them. When he saw that their own weapons were useless, and in desperation began grabbing at the Spartan spears. And now the Spartans drew the Xiphos, and the real butchery began.
Are you hungry? Are you tired? Are you thirsty? Are you wounded? It doesn't matter. You're a warrior and you fight.
The confined space made it impossible for the Persians to take advantage of their superior numbers. They could not pack enough men into battle against this unrelenting killing machine.
Combat in those days was all hand to hand. You know, if he shot anybody, smart bombs came in. If you were going to kill the enemy, he was going to be right in your face and trying to kill you.
Wave after wave of Xerxes' warriors perished as they tried to penetrate the Spartan shield wall.
Beyond this joke, Xerxes had plenty of men but no soldiers.
But the Spartans took casualties as well.
The Spartans had a method for identifying their dead, many of whom were battered beyond recognition. They would take a twig, put their mark at either end, and they'd break it in half. Half was kept in a bowl behind the line. The other was worn around the wrist. So there you have the ancient equivalent of a dog tag.
If the soldier survived, he could reclaim his twig after the battle. If not, the dead and lost could be easily counted. As the battle moved into the second day, the Persians could make no headway. They were simply not prepared for this kind of fighting. Far removed from the wide open plains of the east were cavalry, chariots, and light infantry to decide the outcome.
Sitting on his hillside throne, Xerxes became more and more agitated, jumping to his feet every so often like a spectator at a football game.
Xerxes just said, hey, you guys go out there and take that task, take these guys out of the way. And these lightly armed deeds went up against the heavily armed Greeks, and the heavily armed Greeks kicked their butt.
Xerxes decided to play his trump card and send in the immortals. There might have been hundreds of thousands of soldiers in the battlefield, but now the combat was between two fighting elites. 10,000 Persian immortals against what remained of 300 Spartans. August 480 BC, the Spartans had held the pass of Thermopylae for nearly a day and a half. Xerxes had failed to crack their defense. Now he gambled everything by sending in his own personal guard, the immortals. They were a magnificent sight. They carried bows, spears, and short daggers. In rank after rank, the elite shocked fell in the dust.
The light-armed Persians couldn't penetrate the Greek armor, but the Greeks could penetrate them at will. And also the Greeks were trained to fight at close quarters and to come to grips at close quarters.
Nothing could shake the Spartans. Xerxes needed a miracle, and it came from an unexpected source.
A Greek trader, Ephialtes, seeing a chance to get rich quick, crossed over to the Persian camp. He told Xerxes about a pathway that wound around the mountainside and came out behind the Spartans.
The name Ephialtes has entered the modern Greek language. It means nightmare in modern Greek. Ephialtes is today a nightmare.
Under cover of darkness, the Persians filed up the track, and on the morning of day 3, emerged behind the Spartans. Leonidas had been outflanked.
He knew this would be his last battle. To avoid unnecessary casualties, he sent the rest of the Greek army home.
The Spartans would stand alone.
It must have been an amazingly emotional moment as men were walking out, brave men, knowing they were going to live, while others were walking up to the front line knowing that they were going to die.
One of the Greeks had warned, the Persians have so many archers that their arrows will blot out the sun. Well said the Spartan Dionysius, we will fight in the shade.
This was Spartan wit. When somebody says something like that, you laugh and fear goes away.
Leonidas was more somber. He ordered his men to breakfast, saying, "Tonight we shall dine in Hades."
The battle recommenced. The Persians closed in from both sides on the tiny band of Spartan survivors. The Spartans, with nothing to lose, fought like steam. The Persians suffered heavy loss.
Then Leonidas fell. The Spartan soldiers rushed forward to save his body from capture and mutilation.
The fact that the Greeks fought in the way they did to preserve his body from the Persians at the moment of final defeat again symbolizes how important the position, the status, the role of the king, the leader, actually was.
Xerxes now decided to bring this battle to a quick end.
He tried to fight soldier to soldier in honorable tradition with Persian ancestors, but he could not break the Spartans. He had lost nearly 10,000 men, including 2 of his own brothers. He decided to withdraw his troops, which finished the Spartans off at a safe distance with arrows. The Spartans regarded the bow as a weapon for cowards because it killed from a distance. Thousands of arrows rained down on the broken Spartans until not one was left standing. They were finished off by the weapons they despised most.
A furious Xerxes ordered his men to find the body of Leonidas, and once they found it, to cut off his head and stick it on a pole.
The Spartan king had made him pay a terrible price for victory at Thermopylae. 10,000 casualties was a drop in the bucket from such a vast force. But it was a blow to Xerxes and the morale of his army. He was astonished that men would fight for an ideal, the ideal of freedom. Xerxes raced on through Thermopylae to capture Athens, but its citizens and army had already fled. Later that same year, 480 BC, they took to ships and defeated the Persians in a great sea battle at Salamis. Xerxes' grand scheme was in ruin.
Had the Spartans not done their bit at Thermopylae, then I think the whole war effort, the whole Greek resistance, would have started to crumble.
For the Greeks it was destiny. The Spartan king had died, a Persian king had been defeated, just as the oracle had prophesied.
All kinds of great civilizations have vanished that left incredible monuments, but the Spartans left nothing. But what they left, just by their actions that one day, is more indelible and is still living today.
The people of Greece, the courage and heroism of the makes an immense hope and triumph. The 300 Spartans would never be forgotten.
I think that's a good place to stop.
Great for
But,
Greece, may the poets among us.
I think you get the picture I was trying to represent there of what was going on. The next story is they kind of, Xerxes took his army back home, or part of it back home, and left one of his generals in charge, and the army that was left got mopped up by the Greeks. So this wasn't a good little expedition for him. So I think that will help us better understand the interactions of Xerxes and all the people around him in the Esther. Next, you get that one.